now this is a little object lesson in taking notes, right? Is that first bit about modern art and Vasari, which would be on the test, right, is not in the recording. Okay. What happened was that in the early 20th century, the term modern art became a synonym for early 20th century art. And that was upheld by later generations, right? So modern art became sort of this thing, 1920 to 1950. It's kind of modern art, right? In Europe and America. Now, not everything fell into that category, even though it's a period we're talking about. There'll be some things that aren't considered modern art because they're kind of retro styles, right? They don't fit the mold. But it became this thing like what's going on in art in general between 1900 and 1950, that became known as modern art, or more particularly as modernism, right? We think about it as an ism. Modernism, right? And the name has stuck. Right? Now, this lets obviously some problems. This is why we call things postmodern, right? Where does that term come from? It comes from things that are made after the great period of modern art. Now, it's still modern, isn't it? It's made now. Postmodernism is now. And we're not going to get into what defines postmodernism, but suffice to say, chronologically, postmodernism is after the end of this great modern movement. At the end of modernism, right? So, these things are problematic terms, right? And with something like postmodernism, it suggests that the term means more than just the chronology, but there might be something that actually defines these works of art as a group. No matter how varied they might be, no matter how many movements in modern art we might talk about, there's some things that they have in common. Right? And so in 1936, when the Museum of Modern Art, which just opened, I think, in 1932 or so, right, had the first big, massive exhibition on Cubism and abstract art. The exhibition catalog published by the museum had this for the cover, right? I love this postcard. It's so cool, right? Okay, we come up, we got Synthetism, Post-Impression, Cezanne, Van Gogh. Basically, it's okay. It's just that easy, right? This is like Jack Black in School of Rock, right? When you just look over the top, right, Led Zeppelin, grunge, rap, right? And just traces everything down. But since it was published in 1936, it doesn't really get us past 1935, which has sometimes been my problem too, right? Because I really like this stuff, right? But it's a confusing mass of different things that there's no suggestion that there's some sort of web that holds it all together, right? That we can talk about modern art in almost a single breath as sharing some characteristics, right? So a set of artistic principles, right? Passed either in whole or in part from one movement to the next. Right? And what we'll do today and on Friday is start to look at some of those characteristics. Right? There's a really wonderful quote by a later curator of the Museum of Modern Art in New York, Kurt Varnado. We used to call him Captain Kurt at college. He was in my grad school. And he had these worshippers in some cases, Captain Kirk, he said that modern art is like a rugby match, where the point is to move the ball forward, and somebody will take it just so far and then hand it off. Like that's what avant-garde modern art is all about. So that perpetual handoff is pushing forward toward a goal that you kind of think is out there somewhere, but you don't exactly know where it is, nor the path you're going to take to get there. Right? And I think that's kind of a nice way of looking at it. So, in this case, what we can see from this Alfred Barr was the curator at MoMA at this point. And what he does is he goes back and he traces it all the way back to sort of late 19th century art. Right? Paul Gauguin, right, 1880s, Seurat, 1890s, Van Gogh, 1890s, Cezanne, right? All of these artists are active all the way back into the 1880s, 1870s. And they're the root of modernism, right? Root of modern art. They lead us toward abstract art, one way or another, right? Okay. So this class is going to kind of do the same thing. We're going to look back at first to see sort of what are we talking about? and kind of where it comes from. And if you think going back to 1870 or 1880 is a long ways back to talk about modernism, I'm going back even further. Right? No, I'm not going to go back to Michelangelo, right? But I am going to go back to Manet for a couple of reasons. One, to this day, Edward Manet is often referred to as really the first modernist painter. Okay? One of two people we really talk about as being the father of modern art. And we'll talk about why. The other reason is I really love Edward Manet. I just think he's like one of the greatest painters that ever walked the face of this earth. And so anytime I get a chance to talk about Manet, I'll talk about Manet because I just think if I could paint like anybody, I would love to paint like Manet. He's so good as a painter. We'll talk about that too. Right? So, we're going back to the 1860s. Edward Manet. Manet, like I said, is called one of the early fathers of modernism, and there's a couple of reasons why. Okay? One of them is that he focuses exclusively on scenes of modern life. Okay? So one of the elements of what modernism is a kind of art that addresses what it means to exist at that moment, and in particular to be modern. Now, other periods did this. We go back to the 17th century Holland, we find scenes of everyday life. This is modern life. There's nothing quaint or rustic or nostalgic about this picture to somebody who bought it. That's contemporary. That's a scene of modern life, right? The difference is what's happened in France in the 19th century. It's happened across Europe, America in the 19th century, which is the Industrial Revolution. And a sense that the period that you're living in is drastically different than what it was when you were a kid or what it was to your parents. And that part of the modern condition, brought on by technology and industry, right, is a crucial part of what modern art is kind of all about, is addressing that sense of being uprooted from tradition. Right? And Manet is doing that. And we'll talk about sort of how. Right? And that's certainly part of it. So, in this case, Olympia she's a prostitute. Right? We know that from the title. Olympia was a famous novel at the time, the name of a prostitute there. So, she is a prostitute. You are the client. You have brought her flowers. She is there, a cute little kitty cat. She's kind of angry that you've come. You've woken her up. Right? She couldn't care less. Right? She's bored. Right? But prostitution was something that was not normally seen in art. That is another way of kind of uprooting things. Right? It's really kind of doing something drastically different from previous times in order to sort of shake us up and say, hey, things are modern here. Right? So, this is not new, the idea of doing contemporary scenes, but it is different in the 19th century. What makes modern life different from the past? And with this, Manet is part of a movement that began around 1850, a little bit before, in France, called the Realist movement, which were scenes of real life. Right? And usually scenes of labor, which wasn't often shown. Menial manual labor. You might argue that this is the most manual of manual labors. She's putting her entire body into it, right? But it's, it's labor, right? It's a scene of labor. So the Realist movement, Manet is part of this. You may have heard of him as an impressionist. He's not. He was friends with them. They asked him to join. He said no. Right? If you learn nothing else today, Manet was not an impressionist. Okay. So, going back, what are we learning here? Scenes of modern life, and what makes modern life modern? Right? How it's drastically different from what had come almost immediately before that. 10 years later, same model, Victorine Laurence is her name, posed, he's not painting outside, he's painting this in the studio, it's a composed picture, but we know right where he's sitting. And I forgot to to bring in the picture of right where she's seated that I've got some. It's just outside the Garsan Lazar Railway. And this is a scene of modernity. This is really what's different about the modern world. Trains didn't exist, right, prior to 1835 anywhere in Europe. And this particular train station, Gare Saint-Lazare, right, in the 9th in Paris, maybe the 10th, in any event, it did not exist prior to around 1850 or so. So this is the idea of a railway yard. What you're seeing, right, they're standing on the edge of the railway yard. So this big guy drops down about 50 feet, goes across into the tracks. See the houses on the other side, on the far side. So you're looking at this big man-made canyon that trains run through, right? As they work their way toward the train shed where they drop off the people, right, which is just out of view to the left. And it's called the railway, and you don't see it. It's here. It's book coming from the railway, obscured by the woman. But the kid is looking at it, right? And this guy's working this switching yard down here, right, so that they come down the right track and whatnot. Right? But this is modern. This is as modern can be. A train shed. It's a part of Paris that didn't exist when René was a child. Right? This is new. This is the new experience. Right? Images of prostitution. Nothing new about prostitution. It's the world's oldest profession. But at the same time, the idea of showing it also suggests this is part of contemporary life. Right? If we add to that, what else makes this modern? I think that's one of the things I really like about Manet. Is he captures the psychology of what it's like to live in a big urban city. Where, you're never more lonely than when you're surrounded by 2 million people. That urban alienation, right, is where you just shut down and you don't say hi to everybody. And people who come up to you are not entirely welcome. So, again, both of these suggest you, don't they? They really put you as part of what the picture's all about. She's looking directly at you. This is something Manet loves to do. In one case, we're the client. In the other one, we're just some guy who walked by, some jerk who sees a girl reading a book and thinks it's a good idea to say hi. Right? Isn't that where you're... And maybe she's not interested. Maybe she wants to look around. Right? As she's flipping through the book. But at the same time, there's this sense of look on her face which is that I'm communicating with you, but I'm not. That you don't know what lies behind the facade. There's that shield that we put up when we live in the big city. And so that's part of modernism, is sort of addressing the modern conditions, how things are new and different at this particular point. Right? Take a look at my notes to see what I'm going to say about the next picture. I don't even have any idea. Right? We've already talked about the fact that in both of these also, the pictures seem aware that they're being looked at. Does that make sense? It's like the people in the pictures are aware, look like they're aware that you're looking at them. So if you're in a dialogue with them. And what that does, and I think this is what makes Manet also very, very modern, is it makes you aware. Maybe subconsciously, maybe not. It makes you aware that you're looking at a picture. Now, this might sound simple. You're okay, it's a picture. Duh, I'm looking at a picture. But sometimes when we look at a picture, we don't think about it in a way that we're looking at a picture. This is a tough thing, but this is something that's important for modern art. Okay? A picture, a painting, exists in sort of 2 different realities, 2 different personas. On the one hand, the thing on the left is a girl, cute puppy. Yeah, where is that cute puppy? She's probably a nanny with her charge, right? Really, a prostitute with her maid. But no, it isn't. It's paint on a canvas, right? So it's 2 different existences. So it's what it represents. That's what a painting is, right? It's an elephant. It's a still life, right? Then there's what the painting is. It's an object. It's a flat object with color on it. Okay? And a painting is both. One of the things that Manet does, and I think this idea of making you aware of looking at is part of this. One of the things Manet does is he makes you very much aware of this one. He makes you very much aware that you're looking at artifice. You're looking at paint skillfully applied to a surface regardless of what it depicts. In other words, it's as important to him the technique, the craft of painting, as what he chooses to paint. I'm not saying what he chooses to paint isn't important. It is. It's deeply important. But he's also very much interested in his role as a painter, what it means to paint, right? So, how do we know this? We'll see this in details, right? But this is kind of part of what makes him a modern painter. And if you think about that format is equally important as just to put paint on a surface. That's an end to itself. And in fact, when Manet was blasted at the salon, he put the Olympia picture, it's huge, right? It's like that. He put that in the salon in 1865 to ridicule the effect. And the journalist, Emile Zola, novelist and journalist, came to his defense. And he basically said, look, you may not like what he thinks, but he's challenging us. He's painting. That's what matters. And if everything is painted, it's only the act of painting is what matters. Then it's 100 years later, but it's not a big jump from there to Jackson Hole. The rest of the paint on canvas. It's the applying of paint that matters. This is why we often look back at Manet being this incredible figure, this founder of modern art in a lot of ways, that he's doing things that are so radically different. In the 1860s, 1870s, he died in 82. Syphilis, he'd already lost a leg by that time. But why he's such an important figure for this. Now, how does he tell us that we're looking at an object? Well, first of all, things does he do? Because a lot of you haven't had our history before. What is he doing that makes it so incredible? One of the things you'll notice with both of these is that there's a sense of the way he lays out the composition of this, whether it's the gate and the railing, or the area behind Olympia, that red sheet, or the darkness behind the maid, or the arrangement of the couch, that you just are really aware of how flat it is, right? So everything's been arranged with parallel to the canvas. So you start having the coming out of this hand. Back in a step here. This becomes a flat surface behind it. Right? This starts to flatten out this, so you stop thinking about the totality. We see this is Manet shooting that here. Actually, he lives right thinking on the other side. But you stop thinking about that, you start thinking about these little patches of paint, right, that are stitched together with that. And that's certainly one of the ways that you become aware that rather than looking through the window to an extension of your space, which is what art often does, representational art, right, allows you to look through the frame and think of that as being logical extension of space that you live in. What Manet is doing is he's giving you some of that, but he's also kind of slapping you in the face and confronting you with the fact that it's a flat surface. That this is a parallel to the wall that hangs. Right? Does that make sense? This is a pretty healthy concept that they want, right? Okay? Now, what is he doing to do this? And this is, again, part of what makes him so modern. Come to that. He starts to look at Japanese prints, contemporary earlier Japanese prints that were doing the same thing. And so this is another thing. What makes Manet modern? He is doing his best to raise to his position. He wants his painting to be influenced from what happened before. He's sort of a number artist in that kind of camp. And what he does to do that is, the inspiration for a new direction comes from non-Western art. That's kind of coming into France through shipping, right? These were cheap because they were wrapping fish in them. But he has, I don't know if you saw this, people are writing in the background parallel with pictures. But you'll notice sort of certain similarities, the sort of quadrant-thing off the composition. All of the areas that look flat. So that while we ostensibly see deep into space over here, we keep going right back up against the surface. And that's coming out of it. So he's using Japanese prints, non-Western art, to sort of, my life is different. It's different to be modern. Right? We're going to break this tradition. We're not like my father's generation. So this is really a huge part of it, that self-awareness. The reflexivity, that's a big word, right? Reflexive is back on yourself. You're very self-aware of your placement in history. And I could go a whole tangent on Manet's place in history, and he's aware of it, right? The Olympia is based on a Titian picture. So he's buying things and he's breaking it, right in front of it. Okay? So, a sense of being modern, a sense of being different. This is, again, the second thing we're talking about, right? When first contemporary life, but then what makes it modern. The other thing that he does, and this is where it's really important, is, again, for him it's the application of paint is the most important thing. So we're now looking at the little bow on the back of the girl, and as you dive in close, you start to realize that what you see is a bow with some plaid fabric from a distance. As you get closer and closer, Manet is it's just paint. Slots deftly onto the surface, right? Get a little closer still, right? And you can see that as we get in here, this could be a 1950s abstract expressionist picture, right? Where the whites against the blue, right? Here, I'll pull out my pen, right? Look at these, right in there. And you can see that he's really is, as he gets into it, it's not what he's painting, it's how he's painting. That becomes as much an important thing for him. He's paying as much attention to the paint and its reaction to the surface as he is to the idea of representation. But he hasn't ditched representation, right? Keeping great details of this, right? That's the area behind her hair, right up in this corner over here. And you can see again that it's just, once he gets in there, he is really mostly concerned with the material nature of the painting rather than the representational nature of the painting. I don't want to say rather than, in addition to, right? Both of these things are equally important to him. As we get closer. Nice thing about National Gallery, you can bring these things in. And by the way, whenever it says if something's in parentheses, that means it's in a local collection. Those are the things that are more likely to show up on exams. Manet won't, but this is setting the stage. Right? Yeah? Yeah, I don't know. I don't know if I don't think he did. I don't think he talked about art in that per se in that essay, right? And then the face, right? It looks like it's well modeled from a distance, but when you get up close, you start to realize sort of how smudgy it is in its way, right? That again, he's really stumbling the paint around on the surface to give you this sense. And when you get close, it becomes very, very flat, doesn't it? As part of this, right? So Manet sort of stands as this figurehead at the beginning, where he's beginning to play with paint in a way, and play with the act of painting in a way that the critics hated, was different from everybody else, addressed the modern condition, but also addressed the place of the painting itself within the tradition of art. Both acknowledging it and separating itself from it. Right? These are real hallmarks that make modern art modern. And we're finding them already in 1860s, 1870s. Right? Now, obviously, this broken brushwork that he's using leads to Impressionism. He was friends with Monet, he was friends with the rest of them. But Impressionism sort of follows on realism, and is often looked to as also an important contributor to modernism. Not that the Impressionists did anything different than Manet was doing, except what they painted outside. But what they did do that Manet was not doing is they focused more on trying to let the painting, mimic the way we see it. Trying to capture through paint the way we experience light and color. So in fact, they become a little bit more realistic than that. Right? They're trying to capture sort of objective visual experience, right? At the same time, they're just as interested in the modern world. That bridge is brand new. This is in 1874. The bridge was built in 1872. Right? There's a new bridge. You get the people look up. Look, I can look over the roof. Right? It's, they're experiencing is modernity. It's also self-consciousness of clothes. Look at how it's cropped out of both the corners, so that all you see is that. Right? And this goes to another book down below that we just simply go, see, where's my standing? Right? With the terrorist on the side. Right? Now, the thing that the Impressionists did, I think, we're going to point to something that they added to this that wasn't already there with Manet. They put themselves apart from the rest of the artists in France. Right? Art in France was orbiting around the Paris Salon run by the Royal Academy. Right? By this time, the Academy of Fine Arts, because the royalty had gone. Right? The Academy of Fine Arts ran an annual salon that was the official place to put painting. In 1874, when Monet puts this in the Impressionist show, the first Impressionist show, Manet puts this in the salon. Right? But the Impressionists broke with the mainstream. They became known as a group with a group identity, even if they didn't have one, that was trying to be avant-garde rather than just an individual like Manet. And by setting up independent exhibitions, the Impressionist exhibitions, there were 8 of them over the course of 12 years. By doing that, the Impressionists set the standard for the idea of being a new breakaway group, seceding from the mainstream. That's part of what we talk about when we talk about avant-garde art, modern art. Right? Now, at that same time, there's a psychological element to Manet, which I think is one of his great strengths, coming through this face-to-face encounter. Impressionists aren't so much interested in that. They're more interested in light. They're interested in the modern world, but not with the depths of perception or humanity or psychological insight that we get from a Manet. And it's only after the Impressionists are over that we get that again. That psychology, that interest in subjectivity, in seeing past the surface, with a group that's now known as the Post-Impressionists. I don't know what they would have called themselves. Right? Modern artists, probably. Right? But Van Gogh was never with the group. Most of his paintings are after the group stopped showing. Most of them. Right? Certainly the most famous ones are. And so in the 1920s, they were labeled the Post-Impressionists. And what we see with the Post-Impressionists, with Van Gogh, for example, is subjectivity. So if we're again talking about what makes modern art modern, right? Modern conditions, right? Break with the past, break with the structures, traditions of structure as well. But also there's a subjectivity that comes through on the end. That the painting is intended for many. The painting is a dialogue between the painter and the artist that we get to see. Okay? They're not painting. Art wasn't until the 17th century, right? If you were a painter prior to the 70s, you were a craftsman like a chairman. You would only have, and I don't mean that bad. We think of artists as being people who make works of art, they make works of art, they sell them, right? And hopefully somebody will buy them. But prior to the 17th century, that's not the way it worked. People, you would only make a painting if somebody came and said, I want a Madonna or a church. And then you would get it. You were painting point somebody else, right? So somebody could see letting them into it, right? And what we're seeing a lot of painting now is this idea that before Van Gogh, he had no himself. He sold so little paintings, so few paintings. This is between us and him. In fact, this was not in his time, so he still had it when he died. right? It's definitely, that's how we know the signature was to send off potatoes and totals, right? But this is about a dialogue between his own faith is sort of part of that. But the idea is he's going to guide him and he's going to represent not what he sees. Right? That's what separates the impression. Not what he sees, but what he feels, what he thinks, based on it. Does that make sense? The impressionists, as much as I like them, they're very objective. They're really trying to emulate the way in which they perceive life in the world. The colors that you are meant to add up to the colors that you might see in the world. For Van Gogh, when he puts green on his face, that's not about trying to capture the effect of the shadow. There's something about the color that for Van Gogh means something. Maybe it doesn't something specific like green, something like that. It means something that has a psychological impact on the viewer that makes them think about the picture in a different way. So we dive into this. I've got some good details in real quick. So we get in close, get in real close. You start to see that what he's working with here, similar to Manet this way, is he's using the paint, the dialogue between him, the brush, and the canvas. And he's choosing colors not based on what he observes in the world around him, but he's choosing colors based on the effect he wants them to have on you, the viewer. He wants them to have an impact. So sometimes they might be based on the little bit of light that glints into his eyes, but wasn't that hot orange, right? Shadows certainly, green do fall back into the shadow against his red beard, but really, right? These colors have an impact, right? That really is part of what makes Van Gogh so very, very popular. And then also here, the background, right? These are little bit of fingerprints, right? He's gone into the wet paint and just started doing this with his hands, right? Those aren't brush strokes, those are fingers. And again, that points us to this element that with Van Gogh, what we're seeing, and this moving us toward what's truly not the start of that day, and it's going to be part of what this is all about, is this personal engagement, subjective engagement. It's work where representation is beginning to have to share the stage with subjective feelings. But when we get to work start that drop representation, this is where it starts. Does that make sense? Okay. A little bit after, sorry to give you a few seconds late here, and there are people crowding outside the door. On Friday, we'll look at some more works from the end of the 19th century and work our way into our first modern movement, okay? So, sorry about the bright light there. So see you on Friday.